I'm a genocide scholar. I know it when I see it. That's how Omer Bartov, one of the world's leading genocide experts, opened his New York Times op-ed. And by May 2024, he said it was no longer possible to deny that Israel's campaign in Gaza had crossed the line into genocide. In this first half of our conversation, Bartov explains the specific operation that pushed him from doubt to certainty: Rafah. He walks through how intent can be read from patterns on the ground, leaving 62,000 dead civilians, most of them women and children. Aid sites turned into designed death traps where hungry were baited and shot. Bulldozers flattening 70% of Gaza, now outsourced to private contractors. 90% of Gazans displaced into tents, while Israel plans a so-called humanitarian city that looks more like a concentration camp. And the collapse of maternal and neonatal care, with miscarriages tripling and no power for medical equipment. By the UN's own definition, killing members of a group, causing serious harm, deliberately destroying the conditions of life, and preventing births, the situation in Gaza strikes a bullseye through the textbook case of genocide. And this is just part one. Part two shifts from destruction on the ground to intent at the top. We break down the leaked audio of Israel's ex-intel chief saying that 50,000 Palestinian deaths were, quote, necessary, and that, quote, from time to time, they need a Nakba. We also get into Netanyahu's biblical call to remember Amalek. Bartov unpacks why this is a genocide, how the US may be an active partner, and if Israel is burning through the moral capital of the Holocaust, leaving Jews worldwide out to dry to face the future backlash. Without further ado, let's get into it. Professor Omer Bartov, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And the thing that got me attention, the thing that got my attention rather, focused towards you was the recent New York Times opinion piece that you put out last month, and it also got a lot of people's attention. And the piece is titled, "I'm a genocide scholar. I know it when I see it." And I encourage everyone to go check it out. I'm going to link it to this conversation. And one of the things you wrote is you said in May 2024, it was no longer possible to deny the genocidal nature of IDF operations. My question to you is, what were you seeing in May 2024 that made you think Israel is now perpetrating a genocide in Gaza?
So in May 2024, in early May, the IDF decided to move into Rafah, which is the southernmost city, or was the southernmost city of the Gaza Strip on the Egyptian border. And by then, there were about 1 million people in that city, so about 4 times the regular population of that city at the time, because the population of Gaza, of the Gaza Strip, had been displaced numerous times by the IDF as it was moving south, and telling people to move out of their homes because these areas would become areas of operations. And they ended up, that's about half the population of Gaza, concentrated in Rafah. And the IDF then decided to move into Rafah. There were some objections to that by the then Biden administration. They said, well, if you move in, you're going to kill a lot of civilians. They said, no, we're going to move them out. And they moved them out to Al-Mawasi, which is the sort of beach area along the Mediterranean coast, which had no infrastructure, no humanitarian infrastructure for those people. And then they moved into the city and destroyed it, so that by August, it was no longer there. And it was at that point that I basically what I did, I thought of um, what was the purpose of this operation. And there were two things that came to mind. One was that the Israeli government said that the goals of the war were to destroy Hamas and to release the hostages. There were then about 250 hostages being held by Hamas and other organizations. And there were statements that were made by political leaders already at the beginning, right after the Hamas attack and the massacre of hundreds of Israeli civilians, which were in a very different kind of tenor. They were, we will destroy Gaza, we will flatten it, we will give them no water, no food, no power.
إسرائيل فرضت إغلاق كامل على غزة ومش راح يكون في عندكم كهرباء ولا مي، بس دمار. بدكم جهنم، راح تحصلوا على جهنم.
There are no uninvolved people there. They're human animals, and we'll treat them as such.
ראיתם עם מה אנחנו נלחמים, אנחנו נלחמים עם חיות אדם. זה דאעש של עזה. לא יהיה מצב שיהרגו ילדים ישראלים פה בשדות, ועם ישראל ימשיך להתנהל. אני שחררתי את כל המעצורים, תוקפים את הכל, מורידים כפפות, הורגים את כל מי שנלחם בנו, אין פשרות. עזה לא תחזור להיות מה שהייתה, וחמאס לא יהיה. נחסל את הכל, ייקח זמן. אנחנו נגיע לכל המקומות. אז אנחנו מבינים שחמאס רצה לשנות את המצב. זה ישתנה, עוד 180 מעלות בחזרה, הם יצטערו על הרגע הזה. יצטערו. אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
So there was a kind of reasonable war goal, which was to destroy Hamas and to release hostages, and there were statements that appeared to have a genocidal content. And when the IDF moved in, so that's in October, when the IDF finally got to Rafah and did that operation, I looked back. By then, of course, I had written already in November of 2023 that clearly there were signs of war crimes and crimes against humanity, but I was not sure that this was a genocidal operation. So by May of 2024, looking back, I could see a pattern of operations that conformed to those statements, to those genocidal statements, meaning that they were not just statements made in the heat of the moment. People were outraged by the attack by Hamas, but in fact, the pattern of operations reflected those statements. And the pattern was systematic destruction of homes, of hospitals, of infrastructure, of water plants, of power plants, of museums, of schools, of universities, of everything. So that when people were told to leave their homes because these would become areas of operations, once they left their homes were flattened, were destroyed, so that they would not be able to come back. And that seemed to indicate that what the IDF was engaged in was actually an attempt to make the entire Gaza Strip uninhabitable so that people would leave, meaning an operation of ethnic cleansing. That became clear to me in May. And of course, since then, it's become much clearer. There have been many more such statements, many more operations, and we are watching this happening as we speak. And the issue here is that it's possible that the goal was to destroy Gaza and remove the population from Gaza, but that population actually has no place to go to. It's enclosed in the Gaza Strip. They can't leave into Israel because Israel won't allow them, and they can't leave into Egypt. And there's a narrow strip of land connected to Egypt, but Egypt won't let them in, and therefore ethnic cleansing becomes a genocidal operation, which is what this has become.
So the Rafah operation of relocating half of Gaza's population, when they started kicking that around in May 2024, that's when you really switched from this is now in the realm of genocidal intent.
Correct. And what's interesting here is that we are speaking now in August of 2025, and if you see what the plan the IDF submitted to the government, quite reluctantly, mind you, under pressure from Netanyahu's government, what the plan is now, there are now about 1 million people in the city of Gaza.
Mm.
So that's in the northern half of the Gaza Strip. And the plan is to remove them from there and move them to the south. Um, in again, consistent with the idea that all the population of Gaza, which is now living in 25% of the strip, by now 75% of the entire area is controlled by the IDF, but there are hardly any people there. The people are in the 25% that it's not controlling. Uh, Now, if you move again those million or 800,000 to 1 million who are in the city of Gaza to the south, you'd be concentrating them all in the south. And the goal is that once they're in the south, they can be pushed out one way or the other. Maybe there will be, you know, some countries will agree or will be pressured to take in refugees from Gaza, and if not, maybe they'll just wither and die because, as we know, there's an extraordinarily dire humanitarian situation there right now. There's famine there. The entire medical system has been targeted, deliberately destroyed. And so even people who are not dying of starvation right now are ill. And even if they don't die, especially the children, they will be stunted for the rest of their lives, psychologically and physically. And so this is clearly an operation that's constantly pushing to the south with the intent of somehow getting rid of them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the most visual aspects that everyone sees on social media and news reporting is the bombings and the starvation, and there's over 60,000 civilian deaths when we're speaking today, and that's a shit ton of people. But the thing that is not necessarily as visual is the operational movements that you're describing, which is it seems like the IDF basically clears out a place, bombs it into rubble, and then moves people back in tents, essentially, like in these unlivable places. And they've just kept like ping ponging masses of people around Gaza. And then you mentioned the talks with other countries. I just saw yesterday that Libya and South Sudan apparently are in talks, and a few other countries, Somalia. I don't know if you have any other information on that, but it seems like there could be a movement getting ready to ship out Gazans and just like take back the entire strip.
So, I mean, I'll say two things. One is um, that we keep talking about the war in Gaza, but there isn't really a war in Gaza, and there hasn't been one since that summer of 2024. And what the IDF is mostly engaged in is not in fighting, because Hamas, as an organized um, military organization, has been dismantled. What you have are some guerrilla groups that occasionally come out of a tunnel and shoot some rounds, fire and anti-tank missile, but that's about it. There's nothing more than that. What the IDF is engaged in is demolition, and
Mm,
that's not only aerial bombings, of which there are many, or artillery, or tank fire, or ships firing shells into the Gaza Strip, but also bulldozers. There are large numbers of bulldozers operating on a daily basis in Gaza, demolishing homes. There are no people there. There's no Hamas there. They are just flattening them. And
mm,
because the IDF does not have enough bulldozers and enough operators, and the U.S. has sent a new shipment of bulldozers, by the way, only recently. These are American-made D9s. Um, they putting out ads in Israel for civilian operators to come in, and they're being paid by the house. They're being paid handsomely to destroy houses. So hundreds of houses are being
wow.
demolished on a weekly basis. so as to flatten the whole area. And if you look at aerial photographs or satellite photographs, you will see there've been numerous publications, not least by Haaretz, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It's reporting better than American media about this demolition operation. So as to basically flatten, by now, over 70% of all the buildings have been either destroyed in the whole of the Gaza Strip, have been either destroyed or damaged. 90% of schools, 90% of homes.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's
so
that's that's
this is what
incredible.
they're doing, yeah.
So the IDF is hiring Israeli civilian contractors to come in and bulldoze the rubble?
Yes, with American-supplied bulldozers.
Yeah. That
Yeah,
I mean, it's hard to imagine that that sort of operation could go on in a full-blown war because obviously you're more worried about keeping your soldiers alive in warfare than you are clearing rubble. The rubble's like when the war's done and you come in and you do
yeah.
reconstruction. The fact that it's still being called a war and yet, there's it would be like the equivalent of hiring New Yorkers, like New York bulldozer guys to go into Canada and, like, clear it out in the middle of a Canadian-American war, like, that would be crazy.
Yes. Yes, and look, I mean, and everything, although there's no media there because Israel does not allow the media in, and it's targeting journalists. The only media outlet that is reporting from Gaza is Al Jazeera, and Israel's killed around 200 journalists, mostly belonging to Al Jazeera, many of them directly targeted. But despite the fact that that's the only people reporting, you have numerous social media people on their phones just showing you images of
Mhm.
what is going on there.
We see a lot of, sort of talk about this as well in our media. How real is that?
The starvation.
Yeah.
Honestly, it can't get any more real than it is right now. Especially like the fact that I don't even look at it from what is happening in the media anymore. Even though you go to the media and you see people like as young as a few months old to as old as 80 or 70 years old, literally dying from starvation. You can see the videos, bro. Like they are literally skin to bone. Like there is nothing left in them. And even for me, like I remember I posted this around a month ago. It was a post on my Instagram page, and I said that all of us in Gaza have 1 or 2 weeks to stay alive. After that, you're gonna see like people dying in groups because of starvation because they have nothing to eat.
Including Israeli troops that are putting out images of themselves on their bulldozers, destroying one house after another, blowing them up or bulldozing them. Uh, that's one part of it. The other part is, as you said, I mean, what is happening is about 3 weeks ago now, the Israeli Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, is the new Minister of Defense, announced that he had ordered the IDF to prepare to build a so-called humanitarian city in
Mhm.
Rafah. Now, as I said, the Rafah doesn't exist, so the population is on the beach in tents, huge tent cities. And he said, well, we're going to concentrate 600,000 of them in a humanitarian city. What would that look like? It would be, again, a tent city, but it would be surrounded by a fence. They'd be
Yeah.
able to come in. The IDF would protect the perimeter. It was not clear at all who would provide the food, but it wouldn't be the IDF. So maybe some humanitarian organization, if it's allowed to. And then they would be able to leave that place, which would be really a vast concentration camp, only if they leave the Gaza Strip altogether. And yes, Israel, it's been reported already several weeks ago, there were reports that Israel was negotiating with Indonesia, Ethiopia, and Libya. And more recent reports have spoken about South Sudan. The head of the director of of the Mossad, of Israeli intelligence, was in the US, apparently, for these negotiations, because the pressure, of course, is being put on these countries also by the United States.
Mm.
Now, South Sudan is not the best place for you to go on tourism, let alone to come as a refugee.
Yeah.
So this is not, this is about as humanitarian as the humanitarian city. That is, it's really trying to persuade countries by hook or by crook to accept these refugees who don't want to go there to live in conditions which obviously would be just as dire as the ones they're living in right now, but as a way to get rid of them, to get them to leave Gaza.
Yeah, and not to mention that it also just completely destroys your identity as a people if you're getting whoever's alive is just getting dropped off in buckets around the globe starting from below zero. There's no way that you'll be able to retain any sort of inkling of Gazan culture or a way of your people. You just sort of get sopped up by whatever country you happen to be dropped in.
Right. So I mean, this is when you get to defining what is actually happening, and obviously, as I said before, there are obviously war crimes, disproportionate use of munitions, forcible removal of people, forcible displacement of people, um, killing large numbers of civilians. All of that was going on already by November of 2023. By then, already about 10,000 people had died. By now, we are talking, the conservative estimate is about 62,000, but other estimates are much higher than that, go over 100,000. And that's just, people whose names you can register, but there are many people who cannot be registered. Uh, but what you're talking about is how does that, uh, why would we define it as genocide? And genocide is, actions taking out or carried out with the intent to destroy a particular group, a national, an ethnic, or religious or racial group in whole or in part as such. And so, who are the people in Gaza? 80% of the people in Gaza are people who, and descendants of people who were expelled from what became the State of Israel in 1948. So, they're refugees and the children and grandchildren of refugees. That's the people who are there. And they see themselves as Palestinians. They're part of the Palestinian
Mhm.
people and they have a national culture. They're an ethnic group, they're a national group, and they're a religious group. The majority of them are Muslim. So that's who they are. If you destroy them in a genocidal manner, what you're trying to do is to destroy them as a group, not to kill all of them, but to destroy them as a group. Uh, and you do that by, first of all, making it impossible for them to live where they are. You kill members of the group. You create conditions that make it certain that many members of the group would be physically and mentally harmed. So you destroy the medical system, you destroy the schools, you destroy the universities, you make it impossible for the group to be able to reconstitute its culture, you destroy its museums, its archives, so everything, even if the fighting is over, all of that will not be standing anymore. And then you also destroy its or harm seriously its ability to have children. And
Mm.
one thing that is not spoken enough about is the harm that is being caused to pregnant women. Uh, there's a, there's a rise of 300% of miscarriages since October 7th.
Jesus.
Uh, the every fifth child born is born either underweight or prematurely,
Mm.
and there are no hospitals to take care of them. There's hardly any formula to feed them because of lack of food. It's very hard for women to breastfeed because they're not getting enough food, and so the death rate of children is very high because of that. So that's actually harming the ability of the group to have children. Um, and then finally, as you said, if you move members of the group to other places where they can no longer have their group identity, you're then, even if you're not killing them, you are destroying them as a group. They will never be able to reconstitute themselves again
Mm.
as a group. And that's part of this genocidal process, and genocide is always a process. It's not that one day you come and kill everyone. It's a process in which you attempt to destroy that group as such.
Yeah, I think this would be a good time to parse out the definitions with the difference between genocide and ethnic cleansing, because there are a lot of people that hear, you know, 3% of the population being killed, which is, that's still an extraordinary number of people. But then they hear people being moved out, and they hear people being, cast out of their country, being dropped in buckets around the globe. A lot of people would say that sounds more like ethnic cleansing to me, bordering on genocide, with the possibility of genocide. To you, what makes what is happening now genocide, and why is it not ethnic cleansing?
So first of all, ethnic cleansing is not well defined in international law. There is a definition that was proposed by the ICTY, which was the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia after the genocide in Bosnia, uh, which speaks about what is ethnic cleansing. But in the Rome Statute, it doesn't appear as such. It appears as forcible displacement. Enforceable displacement, you force people to move, large numbers of people, is a war crime and a crime against humanity, and can be a genocidal crime if the overall intent of what you're doing is genocidal, that is to destroy the group as such, right? Now, still, what is ethnic cleansing? How do we understand ethnic cleansing? So, ethnic cleansing is the attempt of one ethnic group to remove another ethnic group from a territory that the other ethnic group wants for itself. And once you move them, you don't care what happens to them. You have the land that you wanted, and they went to someplace else, right? Um, uh, Genocide is an attempt to destroy a group as such, in whole or in part, right? So the focus is on destroying it rather than moving it. One is on the group, the other is on the territory, right?
Mm,
However, historically, these two crimes are closely connected. Most genocides begin as ethnic cleansing. In 1904, the Germans were ruling over what is now Namibia, was then called Southwest Africa. It was a German colony, but there were large numbers of Africans there, and the Germans decided to move them out, to expel them.
mhm,
But they expelled them. They brought an army of 10,000 men, and they killed them, and then they expelled them to the desert, where most of them died. So an attempt at ethnic cleansing became a genocide. That's what happened with the Armenian genocide. The Ottoman Empire tried to remove the Armenians from the heartland of what is now Turkey. They forced them out. They went on death marches. Many of them died. Many were shot, and many died then in Syrian deserts. So again, an attempt to forcibly remove a particular population, an ethnic population, national group, ended up in genocide. And even the Holocaust begins as the German regimes, the Nazi regimes, attempt to be rid of the Jews. They don't begin by killing them. They try to force them to immigrate.
yeah,
And then the more the empire expands, the more Germany expands, the more Jews it takes in, and the less space it has to move them to.
yeah,
The problem with ethnic cleansing is that often people don't want to leave their homes, which is natural. Why would they want to leave their homes? Or they can't leave their homes because they're sick or they're old, or they have no place to go to. No one will take them in. And then those doing the ethnic cleansing say, well, but we have to get rid of them, so they start killing them. And so what we're seeing now, the way I understand it, is that after October 7th, um, which was a shock to everyone in Israel, including the government and the military, once this government of Netanyahu, which is the most far-right government in Israeli history, got out of the shock, it suddenly realized that this was an opportunity. It
mhm,
was an opportunity because if you can't manage the occupation of Palestinians, which was the main idea until October 7th, we'll put the Gazans behind a very big fence. It's all electronic, and they won't be able to come out. And they can rot to hell there. We don't
mm,
care. once they came out and started fighting and killed hundreds of Israeli civilians, here was an opportunity to change that and just kick them out. And so that what they started thinking about was we will just push them out of Gaza. And there are many people in the Israeli government who still remember that there were Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip.
Mm.
They were dismantled in the mid 2000s. In 2005, they were dismantled by another right wing government, which actually Netanyahu was part of, but now he denies it. Um, and so, why don't we just use that opportunity and push them out? That and there was a consensus suddenly in Israel for doing
Yeah.
that, a general consensus which had not been there before because of October 7th. So now let's just destroy the place, move them out, and then we can settle it.
Yeah.
And Trump played, of course, into this paradigm once he came into office because he said, well, we have to move those people out to rebuild, and then maybe we'll build some resorts. And the people in the Israeli government said, oh, that's great. He's giving us license. Obviously, we won't build hotels and resorts there. We'll build settlements. That's what they want to do. And so they were thinking about ethnic cleansing. Yes.
Yeah.
But that ethnic cleansing becomes genocidal because of the practice of the manner in which it is being carried out.
Yeah, it's like so a civilization would have to exercise an extreme amount of last second willpower to only ethnic cleanse and not commit genocide. Because it seems like the momentum of ethnic cleansing throughout history just topples into genocide. Like it's kind of like if you go in to with your plan is to just rob a bank, like you're probably also going to shoot someone too, even though you weren't planning on it. You might have had another plan in your head, but then like shit happens and you just start killing people. That may be an unapt comparison, but that's kind of what it seems like with the ethnic cleansing relationship to genocide is that like if you're willing to do one, you're probably willing to do the other one.
Yeah, look, I mean, it could be, and it has been, as I said, in several cases. There are other examples, and I can give you two, which are instructive, of population transfer or deportations. So in 1923, uh, there was an international conference in Lausanne which decided how to stop the fighting between Turkey and Greece. There was a lot of fighting after World War One between Turkey and Greece. The Greek army invaded Turkey, and then the Turks kicked the Greeks out. But there were many Greeks living in Turkey. And now those
Mm.
Greeks have been living in Turkey not for 10 years or 50 years, but they'd actually been living there since antiquity. Um, but they spoke Greek. Uh, and the idea was let's do a population transfer. And 1.5 million people were transferred. The Greeks who were living in Turkey were kicked out by international agreement. But of course,
Mm.
they didn't want to leave and sent to Greece. And Muslims who were living in Greece were declared to be Turkish, even if they knew not a word of Turkish, and were sent to Turkey. Uh, and that was seen, in fact, as a successful operation of unmixing the population. So the Turks will be in Turkey, the Greeks will be in Greece. The Greeks are Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, the Turks are Muslims, and everything is fine. We saw the population, apart from destroying the lives of about 1.5 million people, everything, their tradition, their cultures, their cities, everything that had been who they were, right? Uh, that was not genocide because it was run by the international community. And in fact, policymakers in Israel in the 1930s were looking at that and saying that's what we should do between the Jews and the Palestinians. Let's have
Mm.
transfer. So the term transfer, which is really forcible deportation, came up. The other case is of something like 12 million Germans, ethnic Germans, who were kicked out of Eastern Europe, Western Russia after World War II. Again, the so-called international community, the Allies, agreed to that, and countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia got rid of the German populations that had lived there for centuries, and they ended up mostly in West Germany.
Mm.
Um, and again, it was violent. Large numbers of people were killed, of course. People don't leave happily, don't leave their homes and their towns and villages happily. But it was not genocide, it was forcible displacement by international agreement. Uh, you're seeing now, of course, is not that. What you're seeing now, there is no agreement on that, although the US is playing a pretty questionable role here with
Yeah.
apparently putting pressure on countries to take in Palestinians. But what you're seeing now is truly ethnic cleansing, violent ethnic cleansing, which has become genocidal.
Mm. You've also talked about the fact that intent can be derived by patterns of operations on the ground because you have the two parts of the genocide definition, the operation and the intent. And I just wanted to go through a few of the ones that you mentioned in the article and that have been uh, said it in a bunch of different places, and we've mentioned a few of these already. So we have the mass killings of civilians at extraordinary scale and duration. It's been over 62,000 deaths. 18,000 of those or more at this point have been women and children. 70% of residential killings were women and children. The starvation and siege, full blockades of food, famine threshold was reached by the IPC. Over 800 killed at aid sites with live round warning fire. 200 plus have died of starvation. I don't know if you saw that guy come back, Anthony Aguilar, who is the retired Green Beret, who is
Hmm.
working with
Yeah.
the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He said that the aid sites have not only become death traps, they were designed as death traps to lure, bait, aid, and kill. And the interviewer asked Aguilar, she said, so you saw former U.S. military, you saw IDF, you saw Israeli soldiers opening fire on hungry Palestinians. And Aguilar said, yes, full stop. So, I mean, that's I mean, war crime for sure, but like that pattern of behavior is obviously extremely horrific. Then you have over 70% of Gaza's been leveled, like you mentioned with the bulldozing. IDF has displaced 90% of Gazans. The humanitarian city plan, like humanitarian in quotation marks, because it would pretty much be tents and rubble. And then the collapse of the maternal and neonatal care with the bombing of hospitals, medical clinics, spike in miscarriages, no power for medical equipment. So like all of that seems to like perfectly mesh into the genocide definition, the official UN requirement with killing members of the group, causing serious harm, bodily and mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of calculated for destruction, imposing measures to prevent birth. I mean, like it seems to like almost slide in perfectly when you take into account all of those things happening simultaneously.
Yeah, look, I mean, by now, um, when I wrote about that initially in August of 2024 in The Guardian, there were, I think at the time, my position was still a minority position. There were people, admittedly, who said it's a genocide even before the IDF went into Gaza, and I think that was too early, and it was not careful enough. People anticipated that it would be, but that's not a good enough argument. Uh, but when I wrote that, but I think I was still in a minority. By now, there's a majority of opinion, and it's simply because of everything that you say. The evidence has piled up.
Yeah.
Um, if there was an interview in the New York Times with Philip Sands, who is author of an important book, East West Street, which is really about the formation of the genocide convention, definition of genocide and of crimes against humanity. These two different ways of thinking about these types of crimes. And he's also a professor of law, and he's a barrister, and he works in The Hague. Uh, and he's been very cautious about calling this a genocide. By now, his position is a minority position, I would say, among um, experts of international law and genocide scholars.
Mhm.
But even he said in that interview that it, by now, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, if it were to, if and it is now adjudicating this, it's sitting on this allegation by South Africa from late 2023 that Israel is carrying out genocide. Israel is providing so much evidence that it will be very difficult for the ICJ not to say that it's genocide. One thing that many legal experts will remind you is that the ICJ, in order, which is the highest court, right, in the world court, so to speak, but it's a court for states, not for individuals. So its understanding of that is that in order to identify genocide, of course, you need to show intent. And intent can be shown either because people said that they are going to carry out genocide, and in fact, there were genocidal statements, unusually by Israeli politicians and generals. And you can also show it by a pattern of operations. And you can derive from the pattern of operations that this is a genocidal act. But in order to show that, you have to show that this is the only explanation for what they're doing. There is no other explanation, right? If you can find some other explanation, maybe it's not genocide because they're doing it for another reason. They're killing a lot of people, but their goal is not to destroy the group as such. By now, it's impossible to find another explanation because there's no other rationale for what Israel is doing. There simply isn't. And that's what even Philip Sands, as I said, very cautious in that, was saying they haven't provided any other rationale by now. It's been going on for 2 years. And what is most, well, maybe not, I mean, the most depressing aspect of this is just the slaughter of people. And every time I see these images, it's just impossible to take in. Just the other day with bombing of a market and the killing of children there, it's just really horrific. But the fact that this has been happening now for 2 years, almost 2 years, with complete impunity. Everything is known. You can see all these images if you choose to watch them. And the international community, Europe and the United States in particular, are doing nothing. And not only are they not trying to stop Israel, they're providing Israel with arms. And unlike the war in Ukraine, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, which is not so easy to stop, this is very easy to stop because Israel is completely dependent. Unlike Russia, Russia is producing its own arms or buying them from North Korea or from Iran, and the Europeans and the Americans can't do that much about it. But in this case, Israel is getting arms, munitions, and diplomatic Iron Dome from the United States, Germany, Britain, France. They are facilitating this. And that's mind-boggling for the same countries that claim to be the protectors of human rights and international law. They are themselves complicit in what is happening there. That, to me, and the fact that the public is still allowing their governments to behave in this manner, that's really galling.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dig into the intent side a little bit more with the actual words that people have been saying. What are the statements that you've seen Israeli leaders make that most point to genocidal intentions?
So look, I've quoted a number of those in several places. Right after October 7th, on October 7th, on October 8th, the Israeli Minister of Defense at the time, Yoav Gallant, and people say he's misquoted. People who claim he's been misquoted don't know Hebrew and haven't listened to that. He said very clearly, he said, they will have no water, they will have no food, they will have no power. They are human animals, and they'll be treated as such. This statement is important because this is the Minister of Defense. He's saying that publicly. So first of all, this is a time when Israel is recruiting hundreds of thousands of reservists. They're civilians who are becoming soldiers, right? And they hear their own minister of defense say that. That's incitement, right?
Mm.
That's incitement to genocide. Because what happens when you give no food and no water and no power to a population? They die, right?
Yeah.
That's saying, when you say they're human animals, what do you expect your soldiers to take from that? Now, some, may say, well, I didn't vote for this guy, but he's your minister of defense. Netanyahu said, remember what Amalek did to you.
זכור את אשר עשה לך עמלק, נצטווינו. אנו זוכרים ואנו נלחמים.
Now, Amalek, every Israeli knows what that means. Amalek was a biblical people. When the Israelites were heading from Egypt to the Holy Land, they were attacked by Amalek, and then they fought back, and then God gave an instruction to the Israelites that Amalek should be cut down completely, men, cattle and sheep, and men and women and babies and sucklings.
Yeah.
And people understand it as such. There were numerous statements which by other ministers which talked about, first of all, said explicitly, like Smotrich, who is not only Minister of Defense, but also minister within the Ministry of Defense, who is now in charge of the West Bank, was saying, was elaborating what it means, remember Amalek, and was saying, we have to destroy them all.
Yeah.
Was saying, we have to flatten Gaza. There were some ministers who said, why don't we just drop an atom bomb on them?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there were
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and that's despite the fact that in Israel it's not allowed. You're not allowed to mention that Israel has an atom bomb. So you say, as reported by foreign sources, because it's a state secret that everybody knows.
Yeah, I've noticed that in foreign conflicts where the perpetrators are non-English speakers, or English isn't the first language, like Hebrew in Israel, or Russia with Putin and his military, that they'll often speak in English much more conservatively, and then they'll turn around and Netanyahu and the IDF leaders will speak much more boldly in Hebrew because they know 90% of that is not going to be translated to English-speaking audiences. Same thing with Putin. Like, the things he says on Russian TV often contradict what he'll say at an English press conference. So that's just been something that I've noticed. I'm sure many other people do. Is that I think it says a lot about the things that are being said, depending on which language it was said in, because there are different degrees.
Yes, and of course, Netanyahu is the master of that, and he speaks from at least two sides of his mouth and in two languages. And what he says in English is often very different from what he says in Hebrew. And he is, of course, much more violent in his when he speaks Hebrew. Uh, but one example is that I've seen people who are trying to say, well, when you say Amalek, you don't really mean that. If you listen to um, social media put out by Israeli troops in Gaza, and the Israeli army now is very different from the kind of army that I served in the 1970s. They're dancing and singing, "We will root out the seed of Amalek, we will destroy Gaza." That's what they're
Hmm.
saying. They know exactly. And they were given license to do that.
Yeah.
Because once you say that as prime minister, as minister of defense, then they have license. And unfortunately, there's also now a great deal of legitimization by that, by spiritual leaders, by radical, fanatical rabbis who are mostly from the West Bank, or those who legitimize that. So what you have there is not only the case of Gaza, of course, quite apart from the ongoing violence in the West Bank, where now they're importing tactics from Gaza into the West Bank. You have their population that has been fanaticized and from which many soldiers are recruited. So within the
Mm.
IDF now, you have a kind of informal militias with brigade commanders who are very radical. You can read their orders of the day, you can listen to their speeches because people record them and put them on social media, and they're talking about destruction
Yeah.
of everyone.
Have you seen any Israeli leaders, whether it's Netanyahu, someone else in the cabinet, an IDF leader, have you seen anyone specifically declare Hamas as the enemy and not the Palestinians? Like, go out of their way to say that?
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, Netanyahu especially, and especially in English. He will say, "Oh, there is a speech that he made around the same time that he spoke about Amalek to the Israeli public." He then, of course, said, "Oh, we are only fighting Hamas. Hamas is our enemy. We're not fighting the people of Gaza." He will say exactly both things.
Hamas is responsible for this war. It invaded our towns, murdered our people, raped our women, and kidnapped our loved ones. Hamas refused offer after offer to release our hostages. In the past 2 weeks, Israel did not initiate any military action in the hope that Hamas would change course. Well, that didn't happen. While Israel accepted the offer of President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, Hamas flatly refused to do so. And this is why I authorized yesterday the renewal of military action against Hamas. Israel does not target Palestinian civilians. We target Hamas terrorists.
Yeah.
So yes, of course, you will find this double talk all the time. But the question is, what then is the pattern of the actions themselves?
Yeah.
And the pattern of the actions itself is very different. Look, I mean, I'll give an example. There was now uh, a major confrontation between the military and the political leadership. Now, Israel has a new chief of staff who was brought in because the arguments of the far right in Israel were that the previous chief of staff was not combative enough. Uh, so they brought a new one in. They
Yeah.
fired this guy, they brought a new one in. And they told him, you just have to take over the whole of Gaza. And he said, look, we can't do it. If we do that, if we take over the centers of population, then we are responsible for them. We have
Yeah.
to feed them, not only to give them food, we have to actually give them medical services, we have to give them schooling. We are the occupying force of those people. We don't have, as an army, we don't know how to do that, and we don't have the funds to do it. We don't
Yeah.
have the wherewithal to do it. Um, and so he was not uh, being particularly humane. He was just saying this is impossible to do, and we'll also lose soldiers and kill many civilians in the
Yeah.
process. Um, so you do have here a political leadership that is by now is not thinking rationally, even in those military terms. It's forcing the high command of the military to do things that the military would rather not do simply because it thinks it can't win doing that.
Yeah.
It's asking, what is our military goal? And the government will not tell them what the goal is. This is why you are now in a situation where you say the only goal must be genocide because you can't articulate any other one.
This wraps up part 1 of my conversation with Professor Omer Bartov. Normally, I only release the first half of these interviews to the public, with the full uncut conversations available exclusively on the Zach Show 2.0 over at thezachshow.supercast.com. But because of the subject matter here, the genocide in Gaza, I felt this episode warranted making the entire conversation public. That said, if you want access to every full episode moving forward with no ads, no algorithms, just the raw, uncut conversation, become a member and gain full access at the Zach Show 2.0. Members also get to suggest questions for future guests. You get exclusive AMAs, the Zarchives, which is 31 episodes locked behind the vault on everything from the rise of Tim Dillon to CIA secrets, monthly essays on pop culture and current events, and more. If you want to watch and listen to the full episode right now, including part 2 with Omer Bartov, head to thezachshow.supercast.com. Otherwise, I'll be dropping the second half publicly next week. I'll see you there.